Nancy, I believe that
Yes.
we've got Karen Nohelty with us, and we've been keeping her waiting. I apologize for that.
Great. Always good to have Karen on the show.
Yes, we take requests from you guys about research. You see Nancy and I stumble through the news stories where we have to say words that we don't know how to pronounce. And we're like, okay, this study says this, but what does this mean? So once a month, we have somebody from CARD Research join us to sort of tell us things that we didn't already know. And you guys specifically asked to hear more about listening therapy. So let's welcome Karen Nohelty back to the show. Karen, so nice to have you again.
Nice to be on again. I always enjoy it.
And Karen, tell us exactly what your title is.
My title is Research Director at CARD.
Okay.
The Center for Autism and Related Disorders. Yes.
Yes.
But you still work, you do research, but you still work directly one-on-one with individuals on the spectrum.
I do. Yes. I think that's really important to stay connected. I don't want to just be looking at the research and doing research without having that one-on-one connection.
And you're a really compassionate scientist. I'm just going to say that, clinician, because I think a lot of times when we think of people that are driven by data and science, we think of people who are a little on the cool side. But that is not Karen. Karen is a really compassionate, empathetic clinician, and I see you bring that to all of the research that you do and that you discuss with us. So thank you for being so amazing.
Well, thank you.
And we did have people ask us about listening therapies, and Nancy and I were talking earlier about the fact that these things seem to be phasal. That many years ago there was a lot of hoopla around listening therapies, and then it seemed to go away, and now it's back again. But everybody, like I was telling you that it was called Baralt, and you came back to me and said, no, Shannon, it's Berard. And I was like, really? That's how long it's been off the mainstream that I had renamed it. But it's very interesting to me that the industry has also renamed it also, that people aren't calling it Tomatis or Berard anymore. They're calling it listening therapy. And I want to hear what you have to say, because I think it has to do with what you're going to say. So tell us, what'd you find?
Sure. Well, first of all, I want to talk about what listening therapy is. It's also called, auditory integration training, like you said. Berard, Tomatis is another term people may have heard. Simona, sound therapy. So there are a lot of terms, and all of these are under that same umbrella of listening therapy. Each of those approaches is a little bit different, but in general, what these techniques all involve is a focus on improving sound sensitivity and treating behaviors that result from pain or agitation due to that hypersensitivity that individuals experience. And all these methods involve listening to music or sounds or nature sounds that have been modified or filtered in some way, and you listen for a certain period of time. And for most of these methods, it's okay, you might listen for half an hour, twice a day for 10 days, something like that. There's usually certain schedules that are prescribed with this. And the goal of these treatments is to improve auditory processing and concentration. And these techniques are not unique to autism, but to a large extent, that's how it was popularized. And now the criteria for autism does include hypersensitivities as one of the criteria. So it makes sense why this type of therapy would be focused on autism.
And these therapies are generally quite intensive, are they not, Karen?
They are. They're usually more short term, but intensive in that short term.
Right. Because I remember when Wyatt was younger, I considered some of these therapies. Shannon, did you consider these therapies?
Absolutely. We looked into AIT, and we've actually had Kimberly Herwall. I'm not going to remember what her last hyphenated name is. We've had her on the show talking about IET. It was very expensive.
Right.
And I mean, like, cost prohibitively. So that is why we didn't do it. I'll be honest, after looking at it, I wasn't as much looking at it for my son as I was looking at it for me. I have a really hard time with noise and concentrating. And I was hearing stories of families that the whole family would do it because once you pay for one person, often it was like more cost effective to do the whole family. And I would hear the dad had like an epiphany and experienced the world differently maybe the child didn't, but that the mom did or the dad did. So I was interested in it for me, but it was way too expensive. So what about, we tasked you with finding out what's the research behind, is it worth it for that much money? Is there any bang for your buck?
Yes, does it actually work? So I looked into this. First of all, I found a review that was done in 2011, so a couple years ago, by Sin and colleagues. And what they did is they identified randomized controlled trials on AIT with autistic individuals. And randomized controlled trials are considered the gold standard generally, in part because they include a treatment and a control group. And that leads us to have a lot of confidence in the results of these kind of studies. So with AIT, that would involve, the treatment group would involve a group that received the AIT treatment and a control group that didn't or received it at a delay. So they looked at the literature. They found 7 of these types of studies, and looked at the results. So in 3 of them, there was no benefit seen in the groups that received AIT versus the control group. In an additional 3, these were all smaller studies, the AIT group showed some improvements, but there were some concerns about the validity of the tests. I'm not going to go into those details, but some sciencey, researchy concerns. And also, not all the studies showed statistical significance. It's like, okay, what do we care about this? I mean, we care because, okay, is the amount of improvement enough to actually have real world effects? Right? And if it doesn't even show statistical significance, is it actually going to have some real world effects? There's some question there. So those were the first 6 studies. The last study assessed impact on language and found no difference between the AIT group and a control group. So the authors of this review concluded that there's no evidence that AIT is effective with the autistic population and that it should be considered experimental. So, in summary here, of those 7 studies that they looked at, only 2 showed statistically significant improvements, and it wasn't seen across all of the things that they measured. This review also looked at adverse events, basically side effects, which I think is another really important piece here. Only 2 of those 7 studies measured it, and they reported only minor side effects that didn't seem to differ between the control group and the AIT group. So that is a little bit encouraging on that side of things. But that's what that review found.
Okay. So the takeaway, because I always like to restate it and go, do I have it right? So the takeaway is that across 7 studies, they didn't see something significant to say, ooh, why we would run out and do this, but there weren't any significant drawbacks either. So if you were going to want to do this, you would need to go into it knowing it's going to cost a lot and it may not have a big benefit for you. But if you tried it, it's likely not going to hurt your child.
Right.
Okay.
I did look into a little bit more research here because, randomized controlled trials are the gold standard, but maybe there was some evidence that wasn't as stringent. And, I didn't really find any less stringent support either. There are 2 really comprehensive reviews that were done more recently than 2011. And the first one is the National Standards Project. And they looked at a lot of different types of interventions for individuals with autism and assessed the strength of the evidence. So they labeled AIT as unestablished, as opposed to emerging or established in terms of the strength of the evidence. And that meant there was little to no evidence in the literature, and they were looking more broadly than just randomized controlled trials. So digging in a little bit deeper, okay, we're not finding too much evidence to support the effectiveness here. Yeah.
Okay. And I think that's really important, especially if somebody is going to plunk down $5,000 to do a therapy and take time from, it's often a really extensive, like 2-week, very intensive, but that's what I remember it being, Nancy, was $5,000.
I remember it being very prohibitively expensive, but also it required a big time of that investment in a relatively short period of time. But Wyatt would have had to miss school, miss ABA therapy, and do an intensive one-on-one with a practitioner of this at home.
Yes. Yeah, that they would have to, what I recall was that, for instance, you had to be there to put on the headphones and listen for a half an hour. And then you had to have precisely like 2 hours off. And then you had to come back and do the next section. So it really, you had to really take off like a 10-day period for the child to do it, and the cost of that beyond the $5,000 for the treatment. Like, what were you missing out on? What was the family missing out on? So, Karen, I'm so grateful that you looked all that up. I think that gives people information so that they can make choices for themselves about how they want to spend their time and their money. We try to follow the science here to say what's worth it. But I think we also salute to, if it's not harming somebody, and if it's something, I think that everything that we do, at some point, someone said, I don't know if it's effective. You know what I mean? So I'm always aware of that. And a lot of times there just isn't enough money to do enough research to show, but I know from my personal experience, I know people who did this, who spent the money. And in one case, I know that the family really felt like it made a big difference. But in every other case, somebody else in the family had the difference, not the child. And that there was a frustration of, well, we just plunked down 20 grand and, my husband's better, but my child, we did this for our child and we didn't see a big, big difference. And I don't know very many people who have 25 or 20 grand laying around that isn't earmarked towards something. I want to know more of those people. But I don't know any of those people off the top of my head. So Karen, thank you so much is that basically, or is there more that you had?
That's basically it. But I wanted to end on maybe a little more positive note here, is that we do have some interventions that we know can address, some of the symptoms associated with autism, specifically like the sensory sensitivities that AIT addresses. There are some things about changing the environmental strategies. We can look at gradually fading in sounds. We can look at teaching individuals to communicate when a sound is painful. So there are certain things that are evidence-based that I wanted to kind of end on that note. It's not like, okay, we just can't address these things at all. There are some strategies that we know do work for different methodologies.
One of the things that I want to put out there that I don't feel like gets talked about enough is that in skills, there is a section in the academic curriculum that is on phonemic awareness.
Yes.
And I think that it's one of the most brilliant things that there is. I think it's the unsung hero of skills. And I have heard people have great success with it. There's just a series of lessons of helping to tune your child's ear to certain sounds. Because in the English language, we have the English language is very hard to hear. We have so many diphthongs and triphthongs. When you just think about when you say the word hour, that's hard to say. That's a triphthong, hour. And former speech teacher, but not only do you have to hear all of those sounds, which are very hard to hear, especially if somebody talks a little bit, different than what you perceive. So if they have an accent or, are using any colloquialisms, harder to hear. But then you have to sort out, are they talking about an hour that is 60 minutes? Or are they talking about hour as in possession? We have so many words in the English language that sound exactly the same that you have to be able to pick apart the sounds and understand context. And that phonemic awareness set of lessons and skills is unlike anything else that I'm aware of. So I'm a big fan of that. That's actually helped me.
Yeah.
I'm just going to say. But so the next thing, somebody else reached out to me this week, Karen, and said, now there's a lot of people that are saying that vision therapy also could help with the auditory processing. But there is a group of people that have glasses now that they put on an individual and that it helps them to hear better. So now I would love it if you and your team would look at vision therapy to see if that is helpful at all. But does vision therapy help with sensory processing?
Okay, I will have my team look into it. We'll get back to you on a future show.
All right. Because there right now, especially on Facebook, there are a lot of ads. I don't know what you guys get, but I get this over and over now because we've been talking about listening therapies. And there's one ad in particular that is about a boy. There's an article where the mom says he was having trouble focusing, he was having trouble listening, and that he got a pair of these glasses, and they say these glasses help me to hear better. And they're not the first people to make this claim. So it's a very interesting, we'd love to hear more about that.
Well, and I have heard that there are individuals who experience senses differently, and they might experience one sense like we experience a different sense. So maybe we can pull in some of that information as well to highlight how this might be experienced by an individual. Yeah.
Well, what interests me, I mean, with dyslexia, many, many years ago, they started discovering when I was teaching, and I had a bunch of students who were considered to have dyslexia, they gave us squares of carpet to teach them spelling, because I would have students and they would reverse their B's and their D's and their E's, but the minute you would have them spell it on the carpet, because there was the sensory, they were able to write it just fine. But the longer away from the carpet, the harder it was for their brain to decode it. And then since that time, of course, they've come out with the colored sheets. I don't know if you know this, Nancy, but for many people with dyslexia, the words jump around, but they have found that different people, different colors, and it's very mainstream now for teachers. You can go to any teacher supply store and they'll sell you a box of colored sheets specifically for individuals with dyslexia. And you place a colored sheet on top of the text, and the student will say to you, "What did you just do? The words aren't jumping around." It's just the color. So part of it is that these glasses, to my understanding, are color coded. So instead of having a sheet that you put over something, it's glasses. It's literally the rose colored glasses.
Yes, I have heard of that technique.
So we'd love to know if that's a hoax or if that's a real thing, Karen.
I'll look into it. Yeah, we'll look into it.
It sounds hoaxy to me, but the fact that it works with dyslexia makes me go, maybe, I don't know.
Maybe.
But I want a pair of rose-colored glasses. Don't you, Nancy? That's what. All right. Well, Karen, we so appreciate you, and we look forward to having you or somebody from your team back on in May. We want to wish you a very happy April. Whether it's autism awareness, autism acceptance, autism action, autism other A word that you're commemorating and celebrating this month, we thank you for being here.
Great. Well, thank you.
Thank you, Karen.
All right. You take care.
Take care. Take care.
Thanks for watching Autism Live. If you found anything helpful in this video, please give us a like. In fact, make sure that you smash that subscribe button on YouTube and give us a like on Facebook. You can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram for important updates. And please download our free podcast wherever you get your podcasts. See you next time. Until then, give your kiddos a hug from me and one for you too. Bye-bye for now. To subscribe, click here. And if you'd like to check out some more of our videos, click here.